welcome to everybody in the room and those of us who joined us online. Thank you for attending now. Am I right, Lindsay? Number 5 of our big ideas, or 6, I'm sorry, 6. So the 6th annual Big Ideas Pitch Competition. So for those of you who I've not met, my name is Tom Maddox. I'm go over here. We'll get back to that in a sec. I'm Tom Maddox. I lead the Healthcare Innovation Lab, which is a joint effort of BJC and WashU School of Medicine. And along with my partners at the Institute for Informatics, Data Science and Biostatistics, led by Philip Payne, we are thrilled to be able to co-sponsor this Big Ideas competition for the 6th year in a row. I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact we've had and then launch into the presentations. But before I do that, let me just give you a little bit of housekeeping here. So I'm giving some opening remarks. We're going to have 6 team presentations over the next hour and a half, and then Philip will close us out. If you could use your phone to scan the QR code here, and what that will allow you to do is help judge the 6 presentations you're going to see today. And we have 4 categories that we'd like your grade on. 1 is clinical applicability of the innovation. 2 is its feasibility. Does it seem realistic to accomplish? And remember, the teams have a full year and $50,000 as sort of the raw material to bring their idea to fruition. 3 is it an innovative approach? And then 4, do they have the right team? And we're looking for not only the skill sets, but we're also using this as an opportunity for a strong partnership between BJC and WashU Medicine. So we want that represented. And as you can see, there's a ranking of a numerical score 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. We'll be taking those scores into account along with the judges who I'll introduce in a moment. And then finally, a full application that the teams will submit after this to determine the final award winners, which will be announced next month. So, like I said, this is the 6th year of Big Ideas, and I just wanted to remind everybody of a little bit of the scale of the program and what it's been achieved to date. At this point, we've now given out $1.6 million to our accumulated teams. Each team gets $50,000, which is a good chunk of change for them to invest in the technology, the people, and the other resources needed to bring their idea to fruition. This has funded 32 ideas. And that collectively has had 115 investigators. And these are a mix of our expertise that exists both in our School of Medicine and our health system. These teams over time have turned their ideas into academic output. You can see we're now at 115 and counting of publications and abstracts that show progress in this work and is a very important metric for our school colleagues and our mission as a research institution. We've also viewed this as an opportunity to get follow-on funding. So as the ideas get their initial legs and their initial data, we expect that our teams turn this into applications for additional grant funding to bring that idea into development. And we're pleased to have 12 funded grants at this point. And then finally, there's often commercialization opportunity. And we've actually had teams patent some of their ideas. You see 2 of them here. So we are excited to add the next group, the next cohort of ideas and innovators to this impressive body of work, and we look forward to it. We've also had an opportunity this year to partner with an initiative that came to us. It's actually from the Pittsburgh Regional Health Initiative, and they are doing a national campaign to fund innovative ideas specifically focused on patient safety and the use of technology to improve safety outcomes amongst patients. And you can see some of the categories that they're interested in funding here. When we did our screen of the teams that we'll hear about today, we saw that 2 in particular had overlap with these categories. And so they're going to compete. We're going to be offering 1 award of an additional $10,000 on top of the $50,000 award. And so one thing we'll be considering is among those teams who would get that additional funding in support of this. And going forward, we'll be looking for additional co-funders and sponsors to increase the impact of awards like this. You can learn more about this challenge at the URL at the bottom of the screen here, patientsafetytech.com. And then finally, I just wanted to introduce our judges here in the room, and we have their names and pictures on the screen for you. Several of these are repeat judges, and we've always been very thrilled and honored to have their commitment to this process. John Lynch, Karen Wallace, Liz Peak, Tommy Austin, Vicky Frazier, and Michael Abaddon. And as you can see, these are senior leaders, both at the school and at the health system. And as always, we appreciate their commitment to supporting innovation here in our healthcare system. So with that, I will turn over the logistics to our teams, and we'll go with team one. And that'll be timed, right? So that'll go forward. Okay, so Lindsay will take care of us. Welcome again. Thank you for your participation. And let's hear from the teams.
Thanks for having me here in this Shark Tank scenario. I realize that I should have come up with a shorter title. We're Team Hey Hey, Harnessing AI for Healthcare-Associated Infection. It's kind of a longer title, but this is about hospital infections and transitioning to automated surveillance. What problem are we trying to solve? So hospital infections are a key quality indicator. They're reportable. We cannot just not report on them. We have to report them, and it has implications not just for patient safety. It also has financial implications. There is surveillance of hospital infections, which is usually done in a manual way. Manual meaning people sifting through today, in this day and age, sifting through the charts and trying to figure out what criteria speak for or against a hospital infection in a given patient. A lot of work. So what we're trying to do, help shift the focus from manual going through charts surveillance to an automated forms. And there have been automated forms around to some level or another, some algorithms that helped with making surveillance easier, but a fully functional automated surveillance of hospital infection doesn't exist, hasn't been devised yet. So does this align with the goals of the two organizations? Absolutely. This is about making healthcare safer. It's a patient safety issue to measure hospital infections. And it's also something that speaks to, I believe, one of the goals of this Big Ideas competition. It's about patient safety. It's not just about the data side here. I think that I, as an infectious disease physician employed by WashU, working 50% of my time for BJC for infection prevention, I'm positioned, for better or worse, between the two institutions, and I think I can see a bigger picture here of why we're doing this. So I think the two organizations, we are should be striving for innovating the surveillance of hospital infections. In a snapshot here on the left-hand side, it's a lot of work. So in a mega survey 2020 of infection prevention personnel, the biggest contribution in their work was capturing data and surveillance. Instead of intervening, instead of educating, instead of doing audits, being around on the floor, they spend time in the charts capturing data. This is not what I believe we should be doing in this day and age. On the right-hand side, a summary, a systematic review of different studies that looked at what automated surveillance could help. And they came up in these handful of 13 studies, a potential reduction of the time needed for manual surveillance of more than 70%. So there is something to be gained by shifting from manual to electronic surveillance. We've essentially done that already in a slightly different situation. So this is data from an outbreak of a resistant organism that I investigated in Switzerland in my previous life. And we went from the left-hand side, traditional investigation risk factors for being an infected patient in an outbreak setting with random forest. This is essentially a decision tree where the algorithm learns to classify patients, to, in the middle, the network graph, figuring out how this network in an outbreak is connected. In this case, it's patients, employees, devices, rooms, and going to the holy grail of outbreak investigation, a hotspot list of where transmissions could have happened. So this is a very actionable list of things. So there's a room which sits in this network and is potentially a hotspot. Maybe this room has not been cleaned enough. Maybe this is a room where a lot of patients meet and a lot of manipulations happen. So this is just the template that we would use. We've done that. The inspiration is text analysis of Lord of the Rings, where you can see how often some characters appear in the same passage in a text because they're presumably related. So we're going to transpose that, do essentially the same thing to understand what is a hospital infection and what are the criteria for a hospital infection by diving into EPIC and the wealth of data and doing the same thing. Risk factors, random forest, neural networks, and first in a supervised way, because we can compare to the standard, the manual surveillance, but we will also be able to go to another step, to an unsupervised learning, and just let the data speak. So this has the potential to radically change how surveillance is done. It has the potential to free up a lot of time. Currently, we use across BJC per week 150 to 300 hours of manual chart review for surveillance. This could be reduced potentially. We've assembled a team here of data scientists, analytics, statistician, infection prevention, people quality on both sides, both organizations, and I believe we have much to learn in hospital epidemiology from artificial intelligence. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. Well, I understand how you will use the supervised model, but when you move to the unsupervised model, how will you know that you're accurately picking up infections?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think in artificial intelligence, from what I know of so far, traditionally supervised models have helped the algorithms, the machine learning, the processes to define what we tell them, what we want to find out. And this would be a healthcare associated infection that we have identified by manual surveillance, by applying CDC and HSN criteria. And that would be the gold standard. So we could compare in the supervised model, what does the algorithm identify? Does it correctly identify? Does it accurately identify? Once we've done that, I think it would be very interesting to move to an unsupervised learning where we can just see what comes out of the, and this is very similar to the outbreak investigation that I showed you. We didn't know in the outbreak investigation where the hotspot is or where the gold standard hotspot is. We just let the system find out nodes in the terminology of data science. And I think we could then compare a supervised learning, which we know is true because it's been compared to manual surveillance, to an unsupervised, right? Which will be the future. It's not here yet, but this will be the future, I believe.
Thanks, Jonas. Could you tell us a little more about what specific HAIs you were going to focus on and what data sets initially? Is this for BJH or all of BJC? Areas where you currently do manual surveillance or areas where we have no surveillance and really have no idea what the infection rates are?
Those are good questions, Vicky. So I would not start with those areas where we don't have surveillance yet, because there is no gold standard to compare what we're going to find in this approach. I would focus on those surveillances that we have in place. And we could, there is no reason why we should focus on one hospital or another, because I think we have the access to the data and we could use BJC, all of BJC, all of the data that we have. You're right that there are different types of healthcare associated infections. Some are catheter associated, like line infection or urinary tract infections. Others are procedure related. And I think we need to distinguish those because they're fundamentally different in how they develop. So personally, I would say we would start with all of BJC, all the data we have. We are currently actually in the process of generating a centralized surveillance for BJC surveillance, and start with one type of healthcare associated infection. Personally, I would probably start with an easier one, like CAUDI, like the catheter associated urinary tract infection, and work with that. But there's no reason why we shouldn't go to all of them. There's been a couple publication out there focusing on colorectal surgical site infection and doing exactly these things. So I think we could do that too.
So I had a question around the patients you're going to be, do you expect that this technology would identify additional infections that you weren't catching the other way? And if you did, how would you know?
Yeah, that's an outstanding question. Yeah, it could be. I mean, again, we're comparing to what we believe is the gold standard right now. And again, the gold standard is, unfortunately, I hate to say it, it's imperfect because it depends on humans. So there is a possibility that we're going to kind of shoot over our goal and identify additional hits that we have to then validate and see, was that a hit that we actually missed by manual surveillance? So it could well be that we identify additional hospital infections. Is it something that we need to report back to the CDC? I'm not so sure about that. I would have to think a little harder, but it's certainly possible. It's possible that we become more accurate in this way. And again, there's at least one publication that I've come across that saw with machine learning algorithms an improved detection of hospital infections. So it's possible.
And we've got one final question in the Q&A here. Do you have any validation data for your model?
Any validation?
Yeah, any validation data for your model?
No, I mean, again, this is something that I would use as an inspiration, the outbreak investigation, but this is content-wise something different. If this is about validating our findings as we go, yes, then we have the validation data set is our manual surveillance, which we currently collect and which we report. I hope I understood that question right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Roth. I'm the manager of patient experience for the BJC Medical Group. We are here today to talk about wait times, an advanced notice system of wait times for our patients. I want to recognize my team who also helped with this presentation as well, Petra and Brianna, who are part of the BJC Medical Group patient experience team, and Emily, who's with our Center for Clinical Excellence. So very happy to have them here with us. So when we're talking about this, when we're talking about what problem we're trying to solve, we're talking about wait times. When we're talking about wait times in healthcare, it's kind of comes as part of the business, right? We're going to have wait times whether or not we want them. But what we're really thinking about with those wait times, what we really want to address is those frustrations that come with our patients who are coming with extended wait times, either in an exam room where they might feel forgotten about, or sitting in a waiting room waiting for their appointment. We have a couple data points on there that every 10 minutes was associated in consistent decreases in access, communication, and patient experience scores. But when patients continue to get more frustrated, it becomes a less safe environment for our staff to proceed with care. It leads to a more combative visit with our providers that they have. It ends up taking longer for our providers to have those visits with the patients as they try to de-escalate the situation. And also overall, we're not putting the patient at the center of what we do, which is at the heart of all the values that we have. Because what we have in our practices is if a patient shows up 20 minutes late, we're really quick to say, oh, nope, the patient showed up late. Let's dismiss them, or let's make them reschedule, or let's do these things that negatively impact the patient, even if maybe our providers are running an hour behind. So they're still maybe 40 minutes early for their appointment. So instead of looking intrinsically at us as a healthcare organization, we want to change this focus to be proactive with our wait time approach, to inform patients in advance so they can wait in a time that's comfortable for them, that works for their schedule, and allows them to best handle and manage their time as they go through. So what we're going to talk through today is really getting back to that patient-centered approach that both WashU and BJC has in their core values of getting to the patient at the heart of everything we do. So when we talk about this being a problem, we also talk about patient leakage and patients wanting to go to one of our competitors, potentially in the St. Louis market here. We have data up here. This comes from an NRC study. 1 out of every 3 patients had to wait too long for an appointment, and 63% who had consistently had to wait too long for an appointment are going to choose another healthcare provider. They're going to leave. If they have that long wait and it's every single time they come in, they're going to want to go to another provider. And in St. Louis, there's too much competition for us to take that risk. When we look specifically within BJC, we had 37,000 patients rate their wait times last year as less than excellent. That aligns right with that 34% or that 1 out of every 3 patients that are willing to leave that organization if they have waits that are too long. And we had over 2,700 specific patient comments that called out wait times in 2023, calling out I waited too long. I had an appointment at 1 o'clock. I wasn't seen until 2:30. They turned off all the lights and felt they forgot about me for my 4:30 appointment. So when we communicate in advance about reducing those wait times and we get that anxiety down for the patients, it's going to allow them to come in a better mood. It's going to allow them to have more efficient appointments and also keep that positive engagement with the providers and the staff that they're coming in contact with, because that wait time hasn't been there so long. So how do we make this happen? I'll be fully honest. When we talk about how innovative is this idea, this is still very much in the discovery phase. This is still very much in a brand new world that, to my knowledge, does not exist out there right now. There are some platforms like InQuicker. I know there's some with Hello World that gets into some urgent care and emergency room, kind of hold your place in line type aspects. But when we're talking about bringing this into our medical group outpatient clinics, this is something that's new terrain. So we're still learning how this kind of goes through the whole process. So we kind of mapped out what this process would look like. So the day before a patient's appointment, we do those kind of follow-up confirmation texts to the patients that we're already doing to say, are you planning to come to your appointment, and confirming with a yes or no. If it's a yes, it goes into the DAR. If it's a no, it's 30 seconds already. Okay, so real quick. Okay, so high level here. What we want to do is try to make this an automated process. So we want to make this as smooth as possible, whether it's through the badging system, through a flagging system within Epic, that's automatically going to work with MyChart to send text messages and automated reminders to our patients to let them know at a 30-minute mark, your patient or your provider's running behind. Please feel free to show up 15 minutes. We'll keep you up to date with the progress of your appointment. And that way they're able to wait at home, pick up their kids, wait in some place that's not a waiting room with a bunch of sick individuals, if we think back to our COVID days, and allows them to then show up closer to their appointment time, which will improve the workflow and streamline of our staff. And will this work? Do we think this will work? In this study, we had 83% of surveyed participants saying being told in advance or being notified by a text or email in advance would reduce their frustrations with their wait time by, or 83% of patients responded to that. So when we're thinking about reducing those frustrations, building that relationship with our patients, this is new terrain, and this is going to really help build that patient experience, but also our outcomes and new patients with us. So as we look at this, we started the collaborations and discussions on the BJC side. So we're looking at the primary care realm, but as we look at this This has application outside of BJC. We want to partner and pilot with WashU Primary Care, WashU Specialties, but also we think about, I was looking at the initial slide talking about what everybody has done within this program and think about those patents. This has application really across healthcare, across the nation, across the world. This is, again, something brand new that's really going to take things to the next level. That's getting it back to what a lot of industries are already doing. If you think about your airlines or your restaurants, your service industries, a lot of places are doing this. And they're saying, you know, your wait's an hour or your flight's delayed 45 minutes. So you're going to give your time to say, I'm going to show up at the airport a little bit later. I'm not going to sit there for an extra hour. So while initial conversations have been going on with the BJC team, we see this having wide applications across all of healthcare. Thank you.
Great presentation. So the technology exists to do this, is that correct? And you're really working more on the processes of flow within the office, the messaging, the status updates that go into the system, or do you need to develop technology as well?
Believe we're going to have to build the technology as well as part of it. So initial conversations, what we understand is Epic has had some foresight into this realm. So there are some applications within Epic right now to be able to create a system like this. But in terms of trying to automate it and getting that kind of technology to connect with MyChart and to get that all set up would take some manual effort as well. So while Epic has had some foresight to begin these conversations, technology, especially as I had up there with the kind of initial workflow of what I would love to see with this is I'm a provider, I'm a staff member, and I just am badging in and out like I badge in and out to my computer, and it's doing that automated work for me. So all that technology is something that would need to be developed. But again, as we look at the badging potentially not working, what can we do with Epic that already exists to make that happen? So there's some technology development piece as well as that kind of communication and collaboration piece between the platforms.
Thanks for the presentation. In addition to the patient experience, now I'm starting to wonder about the clinician experience. So I think you're going to track them and make visible when they're running behind.
Right.
And so it might be important to understand what the clinician's perception is of that. You could imagine it could quickly turn into a punitive situation. And the other issue is, I think you'd have to see how widespread this is, but sometimes you can get behind and then catch up, depending on the nature. And so do you catch up, but now you've told somebody to stay at home for another 30 minutes,
right,
and kind of built in some delays. So just curious if you guys have started to think through, from a clinician point of view, some of the implications for the work.
So we began thinking about those. So as I was preparing for this presentation, I was thinking about what questions might be asked, and I was thinking of the question, what do you think your biggest challenge of implementation might be? And that was immediately the first thing that came to mind is it's a workflow, it's a mindset, it's a change. And so while we're not publicly advertising to, you know, like we are with our transparency on our website of Dr. Maddox has this kind of star rating. Here are the comments. It's not being publicly reported to anybody searching for you. It's just going to your patients for that day on the schedule. It is exactly like you said, what happens when then all of a sudden you have that no-show come and then there's that delay in there. So those are all things that we need to talk through with our workflow. But that's what I see as probably the biggest challenge over even more the technology piece. I think that there's the groundwork there with what we have in Epic and MyChart to make this a reality. I think the biggest thing is going to be working with our clinicians and our staff on this change of mindset and how do we overcome things as we catch up or no shows happen and things like that. Yes.
That's okay. I'm loud. So this is a great presentation and very important topic. I wonder, you mentioned you are still in the early phase. I wonder in your planning phase, how much the patient involvement in this? Because I'm thinking from patient perspective, I'm the under user. I'm going to receive the message. Like when you develop this technology, how much it can be automated and then how much needs to be tailored? Because we are talking about patient's experience. If I keep receiving the same message every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, that only increase my frustration rather than increase my satisfaction. So just one.
No, that's absolutely true. And we see that all the time in patient experiences. It's the same thing in our offices. How come I was asked at the front desk by my MA and my doctor all the same questions? So when they get that, they get the continued frustration. So we'd want to work with Relation, who currently does our schedule notifications right now, to get that piece in there. And then it's really going to be just those notifications if there is an extended delay, if it's a 30, 45-minute delay, hour delay, just that initial push to go out there, and then it's you're 2 people away, make sure you get to the office type thing. So it's more going to be about status updates, but we also have a very extensive patient family advisory council within BJC, and we have our digital advisors as well that we plan on incorporating into this as we develop this tool out to see what works for you. At what point do you want to be notified? How soon do you need to be notified to get to the office, and those pieces? Because as you said, the patient voice is going to be critical to this, because the last thing we want is something that dissatisfies somebody more than satisfies them. So we're going to have a lot of things, again, going back to the point earlier about the clinician experiences. Well, they told me I was an hour behind, so I showed up 45 minutes later, and then they turned me away. You know, it's all those pieces that we need to work in partnership with our patients and the clinicians on to get to that final state.
We have a online question. Could you incorporate the patient's drive time into your calculation for when they would be notified?
I would love to. I'd love to. I'm not sure how we would incorporate that in at this point, because we have to do address, and there's an accident on the highway and where they're coming, if they're coming from work or home, we're not exactly sure where they're coming from, but at this point, I don't know that that's there, but that would be a lovely phase 2 if we were able to get there. Yes.
Great presentation. So as you think about piloting this in primary care, we have lots of different practices all over, and they are operating differently in many cases. How would you decide where you're really going to pilot it, the size of the pilot, and then how will you measure, you know, if it works or not, both in terms of positive and then potentially negative unintended consequences?
So from that standpoint, we have our patient experience data that we review on a regular basis. We're able to get that at the clinic and the physician level. So we'd ideally like to pilot in a clinic that is potentially struggling with their wait time question that we do ask on that survey, which asks about you to rate your time after arriving before you see your provider. And so we'd like to look at that and see where we're at with those perspectives. And then we also have the qualitative comments that go in there that we keep track of to see if there's any comments about the system. Thanks so much for getting me the advance notice, because if we go into a clinic that's performing really strongly in wait times, or they're not usually running behind, we're not going to be really able to test the system. So we're going to be able to want to look at those pieces and look at those clinics that are a little bit lower in there, who have a little bit longer wait times, to see if we put this into place, how are our patient interactions going through there? And then we're able to track that from a pre and post to see how scores and how comments improve, to be able to track that implementation.
There's another comment online that this reminds this person during the pandemic, when curbside pickup at the mall was an option, they would ask you to click a button in an email when you're on your way, and you would share your location so they could see when you arrived in the parking lot. And then they'd bring the product you bought out to them. Perhaps that's a way to build in the drive time. Not everyone will do it, but it could be an interesting think through.
That's an excellent idea. And I'm going to get that name from you so I can reach out to them later to join the team.
Patent pending.
Another question? Thank you very much.
All right. I am Caitlin Kelleher. I'm actually here from the McKelvey School of Engineering, so a separate, yet another institution, to talk to you about presenting patient information through stories. Physicians currently spend more time with EHRs than they do with patients, and that's problematic because it leads to nurse and physician burnout, and also to increased errors in patient care. And interestingly, the more advanced EHRs, result in more unhappy physicians. And so to give you a little bit of a sense of that, I want to take you on a quick tour of the sort of initial process of getting up to speed on a new patient in Epic. So you start in this patient overview, which has 15 tabs. And yes, the font really is that small. And then you move on to try to find the admission information by scrolling through 40 different encounters. And then you get to a summary of care where you have 6 different tabs and 14 more menu options. And then you get to a summary of admission where you get 60 more activities, many of which are completely irrelevant. And then finally, you get to a SOAP note, which has lots of different kinds of information. And if you're really lucky, you'll get someone who has taken the time to write a thoughtful assessment. And if you're not, then you're going to have to navigate back through all of this stuff in order to reassemble the information that you need in order to make an appropriate assessment of what to do. And so the summary here is it's difficult to construct a picture of the patient and their needs. Bob Wachter is the chief of medicine at UCSF and the father of the hospital medicine system, and has written extensively about this and talks about the need to preserve clinical synthesis. And he talks about the idea of an Uber assessment, which he describes as, in this field, please tell the many people who are coming to see your patient, nurses, nutritionists, social workers, consultants you're attending, what the hell is going on? What are the major issues you're trying to answer and the questions you're struggling to answer? Describe the patient's trajectory. Is he or she getting better or worse? Use this section to be more synthetic, more novelistic, more imaginative, more expansive. Tell a story. And so that is the goal of our proposal, is to explore presenting patient information through stories. So why stories? So one really good reason is that we remember stories better than we remember other kinds of information. So narrative text can actually be read twice as fast as non-narrative text, but we also remember twice as many details from narrative texts as non-narrative texts. People tend to remember 6 to 7 times better when asked to construct a story using a set of details. And story themes can help to amplify this even further. And so if we start to think about how we might apply story structure in the space of clinical synthesis, you can start by thinking about, okay, well, a story begins by introducing the character and the situation. And so in a clinical synthesis, we introduce the patient background and their medical history. The character encounters a problem, and the patient shows up with a problem that they want to address. The character comes up with an approach to try and solve that problem. And the medical team comes up with a potential approach to solve the patient's concern. There's some kind of a resolution. It either works or it doesn't. And the patient either responds well or doesn't to the initial approach. And these steps of problem, approach, and resolution are things that we may actually need to repeat multiple times in order to get to the end of the story or to get to being able to discharge our patient. And so the core question that we're trying to address is, how do we begin to design effective patient stories and what do they look like? And so we have 3 sort of major activities that are designed to sort of support this. The first one is shadowing sort of the clinical use of Epic in order to understand what information physicians and nurses and so forth review, and how they synthesize that information in order to construct the story of what has happened to a patient. Once we have sort of that understanding of what actually the story is and what it should look like, then we move into a participatory design phase that includes clinicians, Epic specialists, and human-computer interaction experts, to develop a preliminary story design. And finally, we move to an iterative design based on observational studies of clinicians actually trying to use these stories. In parallel, we're going to explore the sort of technical prototypes that demonstrate how to scrape data from Epic and also draft stories using that scrape data using ChatGPT. So we will have 3 outcomes, sort of user-tested, validated designs for patient stories, a plan for full Epic implementation and data extraction, and the initial usage results from physicians. We have assembled what we think is a great team, including Epic expertise, human-centered design expertise, and our partners in the med school. And I'm happy to take questions.
Where does this story live? And how does the team use it? How would it be presented?
So I think that's an excellent question. I think ultimately it probably needs to be integrated into Epic, but I think in the first phase, the intention is to sort of create something on the side where we could sort of have a separate presentation because that gives us more flexibility to experiment with the design. One of the disadvantages of Epic is that it's a very tightly controlled system and one where it's very difficult to make sort of facile changes to. And so by sort of focusing on something on the side where we can do a much more rapid iteration cycle, we get to a higher point faster, but then ultimately I think it would need to be integrated back into the Epic world.
If I can provide additional answer to this question. So when we mention the story, it is not just a one story and across the hospital stay. And for this hospital stay, I would say it is the stories in the stories because the narrative is very important. So when we say this and our actually ultimate goal, it will be, this is a dynamic, the template, and then it will be changed on some daily basis and give people the update. And our initial utilization or pilot, it will be kind of like we try to see if it can help interdisciplinary rounds when different profession and runs together. This will provide a narrative, provide a story. So in that way, everybody on the same page and get the key information to facilitate and the communication and the problem solving.
Thank you for the presentation. I think as a clinician, a very needed kind of thing to get a better way to organize our information. And I was having PTSD looking at your Epic screenshots. There is an effort underway by Epic Corporate to use GPT tools to summarize the chart. And so it'll just be important, certainly speak to it now, but it'll be important as you're developing your application to think about how this would complement that or distinguish itself from that. And we certainly can work with our Epic colleagues to learn more as you need. Any initial thoughts on how this would be different or complementary?
Well, so I don't think that Epic has sort of the story focus. So I think that's a unique bent to this. And I think there's reasons to believe that, really sort of focusing on the story as an organizing principle will help to make the information more readily absorbable. And one of the things that physicians are under incredible cognitive load all the time. And, sort of talking about one patient, reading about another, writing notes about a third at the same time. And so anything we can do to help them absorb more information and keep it straight seems really valuable. And so I think the story focus is really a unique thing. And ChatGPT isn't really so much wow, that's the big picture here. It's a way to get to that text relatively easily. Yeah.
Just a couple of things that are coming through online. Mark Williams, who's a part of this team, mentioned that we can also have this exported to the handoff display of Epic. So just further context of what Jing, I think, was expressing and articulating. And then there's also a comment, not necessarily a question, in our Q&A section that says it's possible this could be useful for nurses during shift handoff as well, just in that further
Yeah,
context.
so this
of-
is intended to be for sort of any part of the medical team that needs to understand what is going on with a given patient. And in particular, sort of being able to, some of this came out of discussions with Mark about one of the things that he's found personally is that the amount of time spent talking to other members of the medical team has gone down over time. That, there sort of used to be a lot more conversation with the nurses assigned to a shift and the, consults who are brought in. And now a lot of that sort of goes through Epic and there's actually less, sort of personal discussion as part of it. And so sort of synthesizing that in a way that, everybody gets the same information. And there's also a separate issue that a lot of the information is siloed by discipline. So nurses see a different set of information than physicians see. And so bringing, all of that together in a way that everybody gets the same story may help to sort of bring more communication between different disciplines out as well.
So not everything in Epic is correct. And sometimes we have instances where people cut and paste things or things get forwarded in Epic that are wrong for any of a number of reasons. How will you address preventing the propagation of misinformation or inaccuracies in the stories?
I think that's a great question. So I think that when in that first phase where we're shadowing people, that's something that we're going to see physicians and nurses and so forth being up against themselves, right? Trying to figure out what is correct here and what is incorrect. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interesting signal in the ways that people navigate from one section of the system to the other and how they link things together. That will help to sort of identify, what are the parts that people are actually really looking at and using to make their decisions, and what are the parts that are not getting looked at or getting only very cursorily looked at. And so I think one of the problems with Epic is that it's just too much, right? So the stories that we make probably will not have every piece of information that Epic has in them about a patient. They'll have sort of the pieces that people deem to be the most relevant to this person and this time.
Hi, my name is Cheryl, and I am one of the APPs with hepatobiliary surgery. So our proposal is to use a multimodal patient education initiative to improve outcomes in our surgical and non-surgical patients. So we aim to improve patient engagement and education. We currently collect prospective data regarding postoperative complications, and we noted and coupled with patient anecdotal data, we noted an opportunity to improve complication rates, patient engagement, and satisfaction. Use of our comprehensive multimodal education approach will help patients thoroughly understand their diagnosis and treatment options. They'll feel empowered to make informed decisions about their care. They'll be able to set realistic expectations for their treatment journey. They will better prepare for their procedures and make important lifestyle changes. And they'll take a more active role in postoperative recovery. So this approach aligns with organizational priorities for reducing mortality, readmission rates, hospital length of stay, postoperative complications, as well as increasing patient knowledge, engagement, and satisfaction. So baseline data, we currently collect prospective data regarding postoperative complications on a graded system, grades 0 to 5. So 0 is no complication, a 5 is a death. And, we specifically have only data on our operative patients. And amongst those, the rate of any surgical complication whatsoever is 43.8%. The rate of a major surgical complication, which is grade 3 or higher, is 12.9%. The average length of hospital stay is 6.45 days. Readmission rate within 30 days is 15.7%. So definitely significant room for improvement. But what we don't have are data regarding how patients understand their condition, how they understand their treatment options, how they feel about how things have been explained to them, how the information has been provided to them, what barriers do they have to accessing the information, and what issues they have with being able to access the informational resources. This is just a limited snapshot, patient satisfaction. This is just sort of demonstrating we only have a little information about patient satisfaction. This is admitted to Barnes Jewish Hospital, and specifically on one floor, our transplant / hepatobiliary surgery floor. And it's, mostly focused on nursing care, hospital condition, things like that, but we don't really know, we don't glean from this how engaged they are, how they feel about their recovery process, how they feel that they're able to be actively engaged. So currently the model is mostly provider to patient verbal information. We have 2 booklets describing the most commonly performed procedures, Whipples and distal pancreatectomies. But we commonly see, 15 to 20 diagnoses. They're typically very complicated diagnoses. They have multiple treatment options, including medical, including chemotherapy, radiation, interventional procedures, gastroenterology procedures. And it's a lot of information for patients to take in. And it's, really difficult to provide all this information verbally and have them retain it, especially if, there are already underlying issues, such as having advanced cancer or, having lower health literacy that limit their ability to really be engaged. So by using printed materials, websites, videos, and surveys, we aim to provide patients with tailored information to empower them to be active participants in their treatment plan. And we also aim to provide them with access to these resources, which I'll describe in a bit. We expect to improve health literacy and outcomes in those with challenges to their social determinants of health. And we aim to reduce rates of postoperative complications, hospital length of stay, and readmissions. And we aim to increase patient knowledge acquisition and adherence to their own treatment plan. So we'll utilize this multimodal approach. We'll use print materials, QR codes, videos, explaining both the diagnosis and the various treatment options. We will also have videos about facets of postoperative care, like caring for feeding tubes, how to administer tube feedings at home, how to care for a drain, how to care for a wound, things like that. And that's, a huge limiting factor when patients are going home with this complicated postoperative care. Understanding, how to take care of these things ahead of time really, reduces the risk of readmission and things like that. If they don't have access to technology, if they don't have access to computers or smartphones, we'll provide tablets for them to view these videos in clinic, hearing the information both, verbally from the provider and then, seeing a video will really, help them absorb it. We'll also use the tablets for satisfaction surveys and to assess parameters of their socioeconomic status and barriers. And, really, we just don't have that much data on our non-operative patients, and seeing where we lack and, the deficits are in their comprehension will really help us, develop these materials so that we can really help them be actively engaged. Our team members, so one of our hepatopancreaticobiliary surgeons, Dr. Lee, she is with WashU, but she operates at BJH and Missouri Baptist. One of the APPs. Stephanie Torrance is the Patient Safety Quality Initiative Coordinator in the Department of Surgery, and Megan is our nurse coordinator. And then we'll also have to employ some, videographers and such. But that is all.
Hi, good
Hi.
presentation. What's the average age of these patients? Did you say it earlier?
Well, it varies. So for, one of the most common diagnoses we see is pancreas cancer. So the average age is around 60, but we also see many benign conditions. So we see patients of all ages from, 20 to 100.
And has there been any thought to creating an avatar or doing any type of gamification for the education with the population that we have now?
That's an interesting thought. No, we haven't considered that, but yeah, we could definitely, that's a great idea.
Education is really important, but it's not always successful in changing behavior or improving outcomes in and of itself. particularly when you have either social determinants of health or other socioeconomic and sort of key barriers that influence health disparities. So how will you address all those other things in addition to this developing the wonderful educational material?
So by, collecting all of this baseline data, we can really see where we're lacking, where our deficits are in their comprehension with the surveys about their, so the socioeconomic parameters and such. We can see what opportunities we have to provide them with more access to these resources. And by using different modalities, they'll get, booklets, but they'll also, get the tablets and things like that. So it'll kind of be an evolving project as it goes on.
What tool are you thinking about using, or your approach to collecting social determinants of health data?
Well, I don't know if we've identified the specific tool. Stephanie is probably the best team member on our team to address that one. But yeah, I know there are a number out there, and I'd probably have to defer to her to talk about which method we would use.
Great idea. Thank you for the presentation. So tell me a little bit more about the complications and then the proposed education. Is this largely, you talk about drain management, and is there specific knowledge and even skills that you think are probably going to be effective in reducing complication or readmission rates that you're going to tailor your education for, or how are you thinking about that?
I think when patients know what to look for and know what complications, could be present, and also knowing what could reduce their risk of such complications, for example, smoking, getting their diabetes under better control, better nutrition. If they're more engaged and understand that there is a reason that my provider is asking me to do this because this may happen, then I think that will reduce the complication rate.
Hi, I'm Robert Young, and I'm a geriatric hospitalist, and I'm here to share with you about our project, which is machine learning assisted delirium diagnosis. And I'm working with a terrific team, and we're here to ask you for your help to take care of patients with delirium in the hospital. I wanted to start off with a patient story that one of our team members had. And this is an elderly gentleman who had dementia. He was in the ICU with respiratory failure and a heart attack. He eventually was able to be transferred to a medicine floor, but unfortunately he had agitation and was in restraints and needed escalating doses of antipsychotics. Our team member was concerned, and so she asked the provider team what they thought was going on. And they said that they felt that the patient had progressive end-stage dementia, and they were going to refer them to hospice. Concerned, she went to the bedside and found that the patient was in restraints, but still reaching for his groin. And so she she discovered that his condom catheter was irritating him. And once that was fixed, the restraints and the antipsychotics came off. This patient actually walked and was then subsequently discharged home. And so this patient has delirium, or had delirium, which is an acute confusional state that's caused by an underlying medical condition. It's extremely common. So the literature suggests it's about 20% in prevalence. And if you were to look at some crude administrative data that we were able to look at, it's being underdetected, both here at the hospital and then also nationally. And this is a problem because delirium is associated with some pretty serious adverse consequences. And we like to think of delirium kind of divided into the subcategories that you might have, where patients are either restless or agitated with hyperactive delirium, or sleepy or drowsy or inactive with hypoactive delirium. So in that left column that you have are some of the consequences of delirium that all these folks with delirium have. But I wanted to highlight the hypoactive delirium patients because they tend to have increased frequency of falls, increased length of stay, increased mortality. And they also tend to be less reversible, and they have worse quality of life. And a major problem with this is the vast majority of patients being missed for delirium are hypoactive. And coupled to this, delirium interventions tend to be multidimensional and really staff resource intensive. So on the screen, you can see a number of the interventions that we do. And for each of these, there are subcategories that the providers have to address. So a lot of these are actually embodied in checklists, mnemonics, or multi-step processes that require extra communication. And with the prevalence being 20%, it would make sense that we want a predictor to identify high-risk patients. The problem is, in the past, delirium predictors have performed poorly. However, more recently, there have been machine learning models for the ICU based on the CAM ICU that perform much better. So we propose to use data generated by the two-step delirium detection system that we're currently installing on 2 medicine units in order to serve as a reference standard to develop MLAD, which will be a dementia model or delirium model to detect delirium on medicine floors. And this is leveraging Dr. Chen-Yang Lu's previous work with delirium models on postoperative patients. And this is to be able to identify high-risk patients who would require intensive preventive assessment, management, and treatment interventions. MLAD would improve patient care by reducing diagnostic error. It would avoid inappropriate resource use. It would accurately trigger standard work interventions, reducing staff uncertainty and stress, improve patient outcomes, and when coupled with systematic interventions. We're uniquely positioned to leverage our delirium detection systems, our machine learning expertise to impact delirium care over time. First on the medicine units, then to the hospital and the health system, and eventually nationally. MLAD aligns with our goals by providing high-value healthcare that's of high quality and increased service with decreased cost. And it would also demonstrate a national leadership in quality by addressing a festering healthcare problem. It will also promote staff well-being and by reducing stress, and would improve quality, patient safety, and patient experience. This is our team, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. In one of the challenges with delirium, as you pointed out in your presentation, is that it's missed. And it wasn't clear to me, if you're using two medicine floors, which approach you're routinely using as your reference for delirium, because the studies you referenced from the ICU use the CAM ICU, which wouldn't be applicable for patients on hospital wards. So maybe you could give us a bit more insight into that.
That's right. So that's the two-step delirium process detection system that we're now installing. And that's composed of a quick, less than 1 minute screener to be used by nursing or frontline providers. And if that's positive, a confirmatory test would be done by other like specially trained providers to confirm the diagnosis. And so, yeah, we're at this point, we're installing the system, and we anticipate by August or so that we will be able to generate quite a few assessments that would be of high accuracy that we could use as a reference standard. So basically, we're not starting from scratch, but we're leveraging an older post-operative machine learning model that will be using our floors data with the new system to calibrate it, to adapt it to the floors.
So if you're piloting this now, then how will you analyze the data, and then what will the interventions actually be to improve patient outcomes? And I'm still on the same page as Michael,
Yeah.
that the earlier version was really focused on perioperative patients, right? So how do we know that's the right model to use on these medicine patients who may be very different patients and have different causes for their delirium?
Right, because, yeah, so the original model was also based on CAM ICU data. So the domains that we'll be using are the same because the two-step is also based on the CAM. And so our plan is to use that post-op model and then calibrate it with floored patients, using highly accurate data. So we're not starting from scratch, but we're going to basically try to get the machine to learn how to identify medicine patients based on essentially the same categories as surgical patients.
So if I can add regarding this data, so the previous model and build and based on the ICU CAM data and using for the peri-op patient population. So the ICU, they use the CAM on the floor. I think there are articles and mentioned on the floor, if you want to identify delirium in the medical population, there is another assessment very similar to the ICU CAM. It's only one question difference. And so that's why we are using these two steps and system and to, at the first step and the nurse staff will do this very quick 30 minutes. And then if it is a positive, and it will move to the next step and to get the provider conduct the next, what they called, Rob, you are the expert. This
Confirmatory testing?
Yes, confirmative and detecting, and then that will give us this standard reference and to further validate or train the model which was built based on this peri-op population. So we are not going to start from the scratch. So we will use some existing and to see how we need to adapt and for the medical population, if that helps.
Are any of the medicine units that you're using units where we already have virtual nursing as our pilot units?
So not yet. This is 7900 1 and 2, and I think it's more on South Campus, the virtual nurses. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but I could imagine that you could leverage that to kind of do some of the assessments and or use it as something that you could trigger the team to go do kind of these standardized interventions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Donahue. I'm a fourth-year medical student here and just completed my master's in biomedical informatics as well. And I want to talk to you a little bit about coaching surgery using mixed reality. So for a little bit of background, the clinical folks are familiar with this, but traditional surgical residency is done using a combination of live operative cases, so your high-risk environments and then your low-risk environments, which are your anatomy dissections and lab-based things to really develop your skills. After you graduate, you sort of move on to the continuing medical education stage of your career where you're doing primarily these large educational conferences, which can have a combination of skills training and lectures to keep up with current research and things. So these have been in place for a long time. This is kind of how things have been done for many, many years now. However, we feel these are not really meeting things in today's field of surgery. So for residency in particular, there's the introduction of duty hour restrictions, which have been great for resident well-being, but also introduce challenges where you're not in the hospital as much as possible, so preparing yourself for independent practice. In combination with this, there's the case log minimum, so you do a certain number of cases of different kinds, as well as this shift towards competency-based resident education. And then for the continuing medical education side, these conferences can be expensive. It's time away from family as well as your practice. The availability is limited. They're only offered in a few places in the world and a couple times a year in many cases. And they can be incredibly crowded as a result of this. So the equity in these is often actually very low. So we talked to trainees, both residents, fellows, and attending surgeons. So what do they want in these educational formats? You want a realistic feel. Does this feel like you're doing surgery on a real person so that you're prepared to be able to do this in a live operative case? Live expert coaching, so you can be guided by an expert in the procedure that you're doing. And then increasingly this flexible format where maybe you don't need to travel, maybe you don't need to do these things that are really disruptive to your daily life. So to put these in sort of a Venn diagram, I overlaid some of the traditional training formats. So the anatomy labs, the in-person courses, and the live cases, these really accomplish the expert guidance and the realistic feel, but not really a flexible format. And there's been innovation in this space with online videos, which you can watch, learn surgery from there, but you're not doing surgery yourself. The VR and surgical simulators, which are great, but again, they don't really feel real and they can be cartoonish or just not really accomplishing what you need, and they're not being oftentimes viewed by an expert as well. And then the conferences are sort of on their own where they're primarily just purely education based and not hands-on experience. So we feel there's an opportunity in the middle here that could be addressed by mixed reality training potentially. So just a little bit of warning, there is some graphic content with a cadaveric specimen for anyone who's a little bit queasy, but so here we actually did a mock-up of what we want to do where you have a trainee operating on a cadaveric arm. You have virtual overlays. These are not real screens. He's wearing a headset and you can just see these in space. You have an attending surgeon who's actually seeing exactly what he's doing from his point of view. He's giving him feedback on his technique, as well as you can have documentation or demonstration videos, in this case, also playing in additional screens as well. And we feel this accomplishes kind of the three methods we're looking for. So how does this address the challenges I mentioned before? So for residents, we really see this as a way to augment their education. This can be learning procedures from the ground up, or if you don't have your case log minimum, so you didn't do a number of cases in this area and that's limited by what came into the hospital, or you're failing at a certain competency, how can we do this without extending their training and do this in a flexible format to address their needs? We feel the bigger opportunities in continuing medical education. This could dramatically reduce the cost of having to go to these. Doing these virtually, sending a headset, not having to travel across the world and be really disruptive. And really big thing is actually increase of equity, not just for providers, but for patients as well. If you're a surgeon in a low resource environment who cannot afford to, is not able to travel to these conferences, can you find what's prevalent in your community, learn the procedures, and perform them on the patients who most need them, who are really vulnerable? So where to start? We want to start with something that combined multiple surgical specialties to get feedback from kind of these diverse people. And we also wanted something that WashU is a global leader in and is really a force in education. So peripheral nerve surgery is done by plastic, orthopedic, and neurosurgeons. It's a huge focus here. We're a world leader, and we actually hosted a course here last month for the first time that sold out primarily due to limitations in space, but was attended by a global audience. So our team in particular, we have our clinical team, which is made up by Christopher D. He's an orthopedic and a microvascular surgeon. We have Dr. McKinnon, who has over 1 million views on her demonstration videos online peripheral nerve surgery, and is recognized as a global leader in peripheral nerve surgery and education. And we have Dr. Ray, who's a neurosurgeon and program director of the Peripheral Nerve Fellowship here. The technical team, you have myself and Thomas Wineland. I worked with Tom during my time before medical school and engineering in the semiconductor industry. We work for ASML, which is a huge, actually the biggest tech company in Europe, implementing this and precision engineering for this global network of factories across the world. To when a factory goes down, it's potentially millions of dollars. So can you call in an engineer from across the world and then fix it, which dramatically reduced downtime significantly. And so successful, actually, the Wall Street Journal article written about him and the efforts there. So we're actually proposing to implement a very, very similar system, which uses off-the-shelf stuff. So the Microsoft HoloLens 2 and their remote assist platform. This has been trialed across many industries and many scenarios and over several years at this point in time. So it's a robust system, something we feel we can implement here in this sort of new format. And that's it.
Was really great. Thanks. So how will you actually measure if people learn and then if they're competent and then what their short and long-term outcomes are with real patients?
Yep, great question. So we have 4 different assessment modalities we want to use. We have technical competence. So these surgeries will be filmed from the trainee's point of view. And then we have blank on the name of the validated measure, but it's a measure that's used across many procedures to validate their technical abilities in it. And then also there's one for the knowledge of the procedure. Do you know what to do, what's clinically appropriate in different scenarios, and why you're doing certain things? We also are doing a self-confidence survey as well. Self-confidence in doing procedures associated with better outcomes for patients. So assess patients or provide for surgeons confidence before they do the procedure and after, and how that changes over time with these sessions. And then finally, more of a simple user feedback survey, and that's just both from the trainee's point of view as well as the coach's point of view. What do they like about the system? What do they not like? So it can be improved over time.
The improvement or the advances in emphasis on competence-based surgical education that grown a lot in the last 20 years, as well as an interest in coaching. So there are validated measures, as Pat stated, for specific things such as a carpal tunnel release, a very common surgery that every orthopedic and plastic surgery resident and neurosurgery resident needs to know how to do. So the emphasis on competency in GME has helped us a lot and provides a lot of measures. And the nice thing about this is that, you know, for example, these videos could be sent to experts at other institutions too for additional grading. For example, things like a laparoscopic cholecystectomy or a knee arthroscopy. Those surgical videos have been sent and have been graded to a very good inter and intra-rater reliability in terms of scoring of competence.
So great presentation. Is this approach already in the market? I've seen a lot of surgical video training and audit type products that are out there over the last couple of years. So talk to me a little bit about the uniqueness of this approach.
So the big ones that are out there right now are virtual reality training experiences. So this is where you're isolated from the outside world. There's no way to see the outside, and you're in sort of this virtual environment that's cartoonish in nature. And they often combine these with various modalities of what you would call like simulators or haptic feedback. So whether that's a robotic thing, so you're operating, but it looks cartoonish. It doesn't really feel real in nature. And these have improved resident training, but again, we feel it falls short, especially for things like peripheral nerve surgery, where it's very fine details. The feel is very important versus you're doing big blunt surgeries where they're often more appropriate. And these systems can be extremely expensive. Many of them are over $100,000. This is not something that's available in lower resource environments, and not something like a smaller practice could support, especially in continuing medical education.
Yeah, I think some of the VR programs that are out there, it really is like playing a video game. It's good for skill development. It has its role, but I think this is something that would be much more applicable and more broadly generalizable. Back when I was a resident, our program, which was very well resourced in New York, purchased a knee arthroscopy simulator. It was a $200,000 arcade game. Was not worth it. But with the HoloLens, something that's already on the market that has been used across different disciplines outside of surgery, I think there's a great opportunity here to take that experience and marry it with something that feels natural to surgeons. And you know, the cadaveric specimens are pretty broadly available. Obviously, depends on which country you're in, but I've worked with surgeons internationally, and they always have access to cadavers for their technical practice, for anatomic studies, et cetera. So I feel like this is something that combines what's available, what feels natural to surgeons, and would provide a really good opportunity to, as Pat said, augment surgical education in an era where, you know, sometimes as a fellowship director, I've had to tell my residents and fellows, you need to go see this case because you are shy on your minimums, and I don't want to put our program in jeopardy because you're not getting the reps that you need. So this would be a really neat way to augment that.
That would like become a company that you would sell or market to others, or that would generate revenue? Or is this something that you would just give away, or what? I'm intrigued but clueless.
So yeah, I think the altruistic part of me would say this would improve surgical education across the board. I think there are plenty of opportunities to monetize this. As Pat said, we had our first combined orthopedic plastics neurosurgery peripheral nerve course here at WashU, and I chaired that. It was sold out. Couldn't get more people. It was actually in this room. And the thought came, even when we were in the cadaver lab down in the WISE lab, what an amazing opportunity. I wish people could see this across the world. How can we do this again next year and potentially stream that in and monetize it? So there's a big opportunity, I think, depending on which way we wanted to take this, to develop a platform. And you could spin this up because we're starting with peripheral nerve surgery, but this could be so many other things across orthopedics, plastics, neurosurgery, any surgical discipline, because these are common themes, both in training programs and in practice, where there's a need and we have technology. So why not utilize it?
All right, I have the easiest job here, which is to wrap up since all the hard work was done by our teams. But again, I just want to take a minute and thank our judges, especially John, Karen, Liz, Tommy, Vicky, and Michael. I know that everyone is extremely busy, and having your expertise here has been a really important part of this process, and especially getting feedback for our teams. You know, when you look at what was presented today, there's a pretty broad scope of projects, everything from how do we use AI in order to identify sources of infections in the inpatient environment, to how do we improve patient experience through perhaps providing a little less mystery about wait times. Certainly, there was interesting work around how do we better summarize what is occurring with our patients through computational storytelling. Not to mention a variety of projects focused on education endpoints, whether those be for patients being treated for hepatobiliary conditions, or in our last presentation, improving surgical education. And then also important work around predictive modeling, in this case around delirium. But if you sort of summarize all those different threads and you think about what we heard today, it really was this intersectional space of how we bring data and AI, and then importantly, and I think most critically in healthcare, human-computer interaction together, and think about how we can actually improve not only quality, safety, and patient and provider experience, but also address fundamental issues around equity and how we train future generations of providers. So when you sort of put that together, I think despite the heterogeneity of the presentations, there really is a common set of themes there, which I also believe are really well aligned with our goals, both at WashU Medicine and at BJC. So with that, probably the most important part of today is to remind everybody, if you haven't already voted through the online voting system, and remembering that teams 1 and 5 were flipped, please make sure you do so. As you can see, there were a couple key areas where we wanted your feedback across a range from potential impact on clinical care to the composition of teams and sort of how feasible and of course innovative the projects were. And then for our teams that presented, the thing that you probably want to know, which is when are you going to hear back from us? And we will be announcing the winners of the competition on June 13th. So not too long, but I guess long enough to build up a little bit of anticipation for everybody. That's me. And I don't think I need to say anything else other than I also want to make sure to wrap up by thanking our team that did all the hard work behind the scenes, organizing this event, including Ali, Lindsay, Kayla, Megan, and Julie. Thanks again, as always, for all of your hard work on behalf of the lab and the Institute to put this together. And I'm really going to move on because I don't like this giant picture of my head. So with that, thank you everyone for coming, and thanks to all our teams, and maybe one more round of applause for all our presenters.